Hello, thanks so much for tuning into Byte Live 2021. My name is Nicola Kemp and I'm Editorial Director of Creative Brief, and it's my absolute pleasure to host this session on tackling online hate. When we look back at the triumph, the sporting endeavour and the spirit of joy that accompanied Euro 2020, we also have to acknowledge the brutal truth that we all saw, namely the racism and the hate online that players had to face. It was a painful moment, which really underlines the importance of the campaign that we're talking about today. For prior to that ugly side of the beautiful game really garnering national media coverage, BT and Saatchi recognised, responded to, and really sought to address this vast issue of online hate with the groundbreaking Hope United campaign. And this is a campaign that really underlines the power for brands not just to take a stand, but take action, tangible action in this case, to tackle big societal issues. And we were lucky enough today to be joined by some of the brilliant brains behind the campaign who are going to really lift the lid on some of the insights and learnings behind it. So Peter Jevon is Director of Marketing and Communications at BT. Will John is Creative Director at Saatchi and Saatchi, and Sarah Jenkins is Managing Director of Saatchi and Saatchi London. Thanks so much for joining us.
Thank you for having us.
Thanks. And Peter, could I kick off with you? I'd love to get some insight into this campaign, because the research that you guys did, it showed that 1 in 10 people have been victims of online abuse and online hate. I mean, this isn't just about famous people, but that made me think this is such a vast problem. And you know, it's so easy to look at something this big and go, that is just too big to solve, you know. So tell us why you had the opposite response to that issue.
Well, I mean, I think, first of all, I'll come to the research in a minute, but I think the one of the main reasons was when we actually did start scratching the surface and did the research, it was very uncomfortable reading, which sort of made us feel like we compelled us to do something about it. But I think that the main catalyst for it was there was sort of two elements to it, really. I mean, I think we were starting to see it. If you think back around that time, the sort of February, March, April time, there was a lot of online abuse happening, and a lot of professional footballers were starting to take a stand and sort of boycotting platforms. But I think and what really drove it home for us was partly our closeness to that because of our sort of FA partnership and lead partner with those guys. But I think what really drove it home was our colleagues on BT Sport were also starting to become victims of online abuse, and also even like sort of people involved in the sport. So it wasn't even just players; it was officials, linesmen, referees. I mean, it was awful. And so the bit of research that we commissioned really started to lift the lid on that. And I think you touched on one of the points, which was 1 in 10, so 5 million people have received online hate. But I think what was even worse is you start to look at some of the other stats, and half of the UK have seen online abuse. So it's something that huge numbers of people have seen. They may not have been victims of it themselves, but it just was becoming this sort of just had this prevalence, which was awful. And then you start to scratch again, and women are particular victims of it, with large numbers of women receiving abuse, particularly about their appearance. And then you start to look at sort of different groups of people like gay and lesbians. They were, again, this real focus of this awful abuse. And then weirdly, there was another stat which was this sort of almost this acceptance among people. Like 1 in 7 people felt that if you were in the public eye, it was all right for you to be abused. And you sort of bring all of that together, and you go, hang on a second, this needs something doing about it. So I think, sorry, to go back to your question, I think it was a couple of things. It was our position that we had as sort of lead partner with the FAs and the prevalence of it amongst those players. But what really brought it home was our colleagues in BT Sport bearing the brunt of it as well, which made us sort of go, well, hang on a second, we need to play a role here and do something about it.
Thanks so much for that introduction. When you were talking about that, it made me think about how much acceptance there is actually of the level of online hate. You know, that stat that, you know, that's part and parcel, that's the cost of entry for being in the public eye, for having a point of view, which is actually pretty bleak when you think
Yeah,
about it.
it is bleak, and I think what was also, and we come on to it more when we start to talk about the campaign in terms of what the solutions were that we put in place and the sort of tangible action that you talked about at the beginning. But I think what also became apparent was that people weren't necessarily aware that their actions were abused. So it wasn't that they had necessarily set out to abuse somebody or impact somebody mentally and emotionally by an action. They were blissfully unaware that what they were doing had that effect on people. So don't get me wrong, there were blatant racists and sexists and everything else out there who knew exactly what they were doing, but there was a large proportion of people that didn't. And I think that was interesting when we got into the campaign, and Will can talk a little bit more about that when we get down into it. But I think that was an interesting eye-opener as well. It wasn't necessarily, people weren't necessarily aware of what their actions were doing.
Yeah, and just to add to that, I guess the horrificness of online hate, the very act itself creates more acts. There's a horrible self-perpetual dynamism to it. By seeing it, it creates legitimacy, it creates permission, and then it creates more. And then the more you see, the more you see. So there's a horrific ripple effect. And I think that's why we reach this awful pinnacle of it heading into the Euros.
Yeah,
it's really interesting, Sarah, and I'd love to get your view on that, because it's become part of our visual diet. We're used to this level of conversation, and I think that to Peter's point about dehumanization as well, we don't always see the link between that. I mean, looking at something like this, such a big ingrained, systemic issue that is so self-perpetuating, how did you work as an agency and a brand together to bring this? Because this is a huge topic, right? And I can see lots of potential pitfalls or lots of points within that process and that journey where you might go, actually, this is just too much, this is too big. So how did you come together to get that problem into a creative process?
I think, definitely takes alchemy for sure. There is a complexity and a speed inextricably linked to everything that we did with this project. But yeah, as with so many things, it starts with a genuinely audacious ambition, a shared ambition, not to nibble around the edges, but to take this on head on with as much turbo power as possible. So incredible shared ambition, a deep commitment to put it off, whether that meant budget commitment, time commitment, that was such an important part of it. No fear, not been done before. No, there is a stepping into the unknown, partly with each other, partly because of the type of project we were working with. An understanding of the power of owned and earned media, huge part of this. You can't just like throw money at the paid media because you knew it would stick. Because we're moving at the speed of culture, the media had to move at the speed of culture and the channels as well. So owned and earned, always far more precarious. So yeah, it required all of that. And I guess perhaps the fourth or fifth point would be, and I was able to observe this team. I mean, my fingerprints are not over this work. There's Pete and his team and Will and his team, but there was a real humility that we didn't have all the answers. Did we understand the perpetrators? Do we understand the wider public? Do we understand the victims? And I think the team's willingness to lean in and learn and properly make sure that we were managing the narrative and managing the execution as brilliantly and as authentically as possible, I think was a really important part of getting this right.
I think the players as well. Like, I mean, we formed a football team, Hope United. I think the players wanted to get involved. So, because it affects the players so much, they really wanted to do something about it. And we ended up with like 21, players and ex-players, but we could have had more, because they all wanted to stand up and do something and fight this, fight this issue. So I think that was their motivation as well to do something about it, and you know, to go above and beyond in, you know, the number of posts and what they would do and the time they would give us was key as well.
That's so interesting, Will, as well, because that's so key to the authenticity element of the campaign as well.
I mean, the team is made up of exactly men, women, you know, they're all victims of online abuse, you know, be it because of their sexuality, their gender, their race, their disability, or, you know, for being a footballer. I mean, they are in the limelight, but yeah, I mean, they really wanted to stand up and do something about it. And it's great that BT could use their sponsorship of the Home Nations to do that.
And Peter, you really touched on that disconnect in terms of, you know, putting something out onto the internet and actually the real world harm that has. And I think what's really amazing about this campaign is how the creative craft brings that disconnect to life in such a powerful way. I'd love it if you and Will could talk about that, because that's almost like a sort of real sort of opening up of a different type of understanding, and that's brought to life so powerfully through the creative craft. And I'd love to know more about that journey, from that nugget of insight to that craft, bringing that to life.
Yeah, I mean, it's entirely Will's. That's entirely Will's skill, not mine. I guess from our perspective, what we were wanting to do was because I guess there was other element from a pure sort of selfishly from a BT point of view, which is we've got some big commitments at a sort of BT group level around digital skills and equipping people with the skills they require for the future. And I guess that was one of the jigsaw pieces that we wanted to bring to this as well. So we'd sort of identified and were incredibly aware of the scale of the problem. But I guess back to your point around the sort of tangible action that we could take, the digital skills element of it was not only did we have to draw awareness to the problem, but we wanted to also provide solutions and education for people to change their behaviour for good, not just shock people that there was a problem, but give them tools to do something about it. So I mean, I think and Will, over to you on this now, but I mean, I think you're right. I mean, I think the TV execution that the guys came up with was, I mean, if I'm honest, Will, when you think back to, I remember the first time that you presented the script, it was like, I remember sitting there thinking, wow, that is dark. There's a huge amount of darkness in there. I mean, quickly you get to, but there needs to be, because what it does is that was about trying to creatively show people what impact hate has on individuals and people, and so it had to be dark. But I remember Will finishing presenting, and we all sat there going, right, okay, but yeah, I don't know, Will. I don't know whether you.
I mean, I remember people questioning whether or not we should even present that, because it is a strong, you know, it's a strong spot to kind of bring to life, you know, the figure of hate, and to have it go around and destroy people's lives. But I think, you know, we needed something powerful to make people aware of the issue, and to, you know, to generate that cut through. I think, you know, the craft, it's also born of the insight, I think, as well. You know, I think, you know, a lot of these people kind of, these keyboard warriors hide behind their screens, you know, they're kind of, and maybe you never really see the impact of their actions, which are really horrific, you know, to the person, to the person receiving them. So I think that's something that we really wanted to try and to convey. You know, getting that hateful message is like a punch in the gut. It's horrific, it's shocking, and there's no escape. You know, it's an invasion. You know, you're not safe in your own home, and it can feel like a kind of a nightmare, a living nightmare. And I think that's something we wanted to capture and to make more people aware of. But that was very much, you know, to echo Pete's point, that was very much, you know, the kind of the launch awareness film. But you know, the main part of the campaign was the educational strand, and I guess we responded to hate as and when it was taking place as well, through social listening and monitoring. So when you say, when we think about it was brought to life in the real world, we're showing what it was like for people to receive that, and then going out and while it's taking place, combating it there and then as well.
It's really interesting as well in terms of the agency culture as well, because there's a lot of conversations going on at the moment about, in the midst of the pandemic, clients not being able to take risks or buy brave work. And there's almost two separate decisions to be made in terms of the decision of you guys as an agency to present that work that might lean into an uncomfortable moment, and then the decision as well on a BT side to lean into that work and lean into that uncomfortable moment and get it. And it's just such an interesting decision-making process, because we talk a lot about bravery in marketing, and it's a very uncomfortable, it's an uncomfortable piece of work to watch. And obviously the education around it as well. And Sarah, I'd love to get your view on that in terms of the agency culture that allows and enables that decision to be made.
Yeah, God, it's great. It's a great question. I think obviously we've been through the most extraordinary 18 months, 20 months, and it's meant, and I'm sure this is for lots of agencies listening, lots of clients listening, we are working better than ever in lockstep with our clients. I think we are so much closer to our clients' day-to-day challenges, but also the much bigger goals and ambitions. And I think when you are that close, and when you really understand the roles that brands play in the world, and by getting it right, what it does mean for the business and the future of the business, you're able to present scripts and ideas like this, not because it's a good thing to do or a right way to hijack the Euros, because it's literally inextricably linked to the bigger business game that we're all in. So it's not, I actually don't think it's as hard as it should be to put extraordinary brave work in front of our clients, because it's always going to be in service of the brand and ultimately in service of the business that we're in. So there isn't a separation between the two. This is not about chasing awards.
And with that in mind, and it's great to mention it's not about chasing awards, because we are in the midst of this fundamental shift. I mean, there's been a huge amount of loss, economically, emotionally, and a real shift in what people expect from brands and their role in society. And Peter, I'd love to get your view on this, because you obviously have a very clear mission, a very purpose-driven mission. And do you feel that is understood in the broader industry? And do you think that there is that broad awareness and need amongst your consumers for that education, that support, and that expectation that you will step up and provide it?
100%. I mean, I think Sarah touched on this, and I know the sort of C word as I think we've used that enough over the last sort of 18 months, but the environment that has created, I think means that more and more people are looking to brands like BT, but other brands out there, to step into voids where maybe other sort of institutions and potentially other brands should be playing a role. And I think it's been an incredible thing for us to do, I think, as a brand, because and we've been very fortunate in the work that we put out, but also the elements that we've been able to add to it, which have been much more about sort of educational and empowering people to become better citizens, we've been able to play that story out as well. So I think the response from people, I think, has been absolutely phenomenal. I mean, I mean, genuinely, a little bit like what Sarah said about not setting out to win awards with this. I mean, I don't think any one of us at BT sort of set out to do this necessarily to drive brand metrics and sell more phones and more broadband. That wasn't what we set out to do with it. And but the response we've seen to it from people and what they think about BT and our role that we played has been absolutely phenomenal. And just, Joe, I think we set out with this in that if you make even the smallest difference to a single person's experience or life by doing this, the subject matter is so important that if we do that, then we've succeeded. That's it, job done. And I think from a marketeer, from my side of the fence, from a marketeer's perspective, being able to do that and being liberated to have the permission to do that is, it's been a phenomenal sort of 18 months in terms of the campaigns that we've been able to do, not just with this, but the work the guys did with us on Tech Tips was phenomenal. The Christmas loneliness stuff that we did was brilliant. The NHS stuff that we've done with the EE, all of the stuff that the guys have done with it's just been a completely different level of role of communication and job that a brand can do. So it's been a phenomenal year.
And it's really interesting as well in terms of that shift happening and with that sort of plethora of work that you're doing. And it's especially with connectivity, it has been what's kept us going. Like our relationships with a lot of brands in our lives have changed a lot. And Sarah, I'd love to get your view. Do you think we're going to see a broader shift in the industry towards more purpose-driven work? Because I know, we're a cynical bunch. There's always a kind of, we're peak purpose. We like to call peak anything before we've really got going, don't we? So I'd love to get your view as to how that reappraisal is really showing up in the industry.
I've not heard peak purpose before, but I love it. That's amazing language. So, look, in truth, we've been on this trajectory in a good way. God, how old is Real Beauty? Must be, 15, 16, 17 years old now. Like, we have been doubling down on this for a long time. It's been compounded magnificently by the generation coming through and younger marketeers, younger ad people, because we've got a generation coming through who think it's unacceptable not to have a voice and a point of view on politics, sexuality, the environment, everything. So I think we're already on the trajectory, compounded by this awesome generation coming through. And as we've talked about, COVID has changed us and it's made us think about things differently. And I think the other perhaps critical thing that's given some depth to the more purpose-driven brands that we're seeing, what we saw in the last 18 months is, I think, marketing really stepping up, both in the boardroom and in real world. And I think it's given confidence to marketeers to say this is the right thing to do, not just for the brand, but for the business. We are going to do the brave thing, or we are going to do the right thing. So I think all those things have come together in genuinely a perfect sort of positive storm to allow these purpose-driven brands and activities to happen. And yeah, I think it's a onward trajectory. It will keep going. There's clearly a question like, can we sustain it? So long as we can prove it's working for the brands and the business, there is no reason why that will change. And I think as marketeers and as advertisers, we've got to make sure that we can tell very clear and proven stories to show by doing what we're doing, it does go back to the bottom line, but it goes back to the bottom line for all the right reasons.
It's really interesting from a creative perspective as well. And Sarah, I love your positive energy about the impact this fresh generation of creative talent is having on the industry, because they just have higher expectations. That is higher expectations combined with, new tools to make those expectations realities. And Will, I'd love to get your view. What do you think is the role of creativity? Because there's a huge issue here with online hate. There's lots and lots of issues that we've got to solve. What do you see? We saw so much hate following the England defeat, and there's obviously a lot more to do, but what's the role of creative here to kind of really bring this to life and keep that momentum building?
I think, in advertising, creativity has always been used to tackle brand challenges and create memorable solutions. You're using, creative thinking to solve a problem. You're coming up with ideas that serve a purpose, usually commercially, but also socially. So creativity can, should, and needs to be applied to wider societal problems. I think as long as as long as the cause is the right fit for the brand in question and doesn't seem opportunistic or insincere. But yeah, creativity does have the ability to shift behavior, you know. I think that's the power of it. We do it at Saatchi and Saatchi, you know, we do it, we've done it for BT, we do it for Operation Black Vote or British Heart Foundation, Marie Curie. And technology has a huge role to play as well in facilitating that. I think, yeah, I mean, bringing it back to the hate that followed the England's defeat at the Euros. I mean, I think that just shows that we've still got a long way to go. It's a complex problem, you know, and I think unfortunately it requires a joined up approach to dealing with it, from government and to social media giants to schools, you know, consumers, brands, and agencies. You know, we all have to work together to beat it. I think everybody has the responsibility to do the right thing, and so yeah, as an agency, what we need to do, what we can do, what we're best at to beat it is to use the power of creativity to do that.
Just to add to that, Will, when you're talking, I just think one of the things that I think is just so brilliant and powerful about the idea is that it forced a conversation at that tech giant level, but it also created a conversation at the tiniest level between a teenager and their dad. Say, "Dad, I don't like it when you say things like that." So I think the that major and macro to tiny and individual, and the multiple conversations that took place as a result of that campaign, I think is extraordinary.
It's so.
I think that's a good.
No, you.
Sorry, Nicola. Sorry, I was just going to say. I think it's a really good point, that micro and macro point. I think it was because the conversations that we had with the social platforms were really interesting when we said we were going to do this, and actually their involvement was key actually to some of the modules that we created, in terms of them helping to surface tools and things that people could implement to either remove themselves from abuse or avoid abuse in the first place. So I think that level is absolutely right. And then I think some of the most, back to my point around just making a small bit of difference, I think some of the, and Will mentioned this about our social listening and the where we were keeping tabs on what was going on, both from abuse point of view, but from a campaign perspective as well. I don't know whether you remember, Will, some of those posts that were actually people apologizing to people that they'd abused because they'd seen the campaign and they'd understood the impact, and they were actually publicly apologizing to people. And when and as Will said, look, I mean, the problem is huge, and I'm not pretending for 1 second that this campaign has made it go away in any way, shape, or form. But when you start getting that sort of action and that sort of reaction from people, it starts to, you see that something is happening as a result, which I think is really important.
We had, you know, I saw so many schools using our tech tips, you know, the Hope United campaign as a form of education within schools, which is fantastic, because it has to come from, you know, bottom up and top down.
Really interesting, like the multifaceted nature of this campaign, because historically campaigns have often raised awareness, but perhaps not had the education element or the infrastructure to really kind of push through the change. And Peter, I'd love to get your advice, because I'm sure there'll be brands watching this who want to go on their own journey of change. And you mentioned, in terms of, you know, we always know that you've got to measure what you treasure, and how you kind of prove the value of work like this, when clearly there's obviously a clear value line for purpose, for people, but also for profit. So how do you navigate that as a marketing leader, and what advice would you give to other marketing leaders on the beginning of that journey?
I think we were lucky as a brand, because I think the work that we'd done in the height of lockdown around tech tips laid the foundations for us with this, in that doing this sort of thing is something that is beneficial to the nation, beneficial to individuals, and beneficial to the brand. And so I think that in many ways that gave us a lot of permission to do more of it, because people could see the impact that it had. So I think that was a big part of it, in that we had something to build off. But I think the other bit though as well is that, and I think Will touched on this, which I think is a really important one, about being the risk, because you can very easily get this wrong. And I think the opportunistic point that Will made, I think, is a really important one, is that there's got to be a role for you in the thing that you're picking to get behind. And if your brand doesn't have an obvious role and an obvious sort of set of actions off the back, then I think you can very easily be seen as opportunistic and quite shallow in terms of what it is that you're trying to do. Because I think it's one thing having a point of view, but another thing helping people do something about it. And so I think the way that we've always thought about it is make sure that there's a relevance and a role for your brand in the thing that you're picking, and make sure that you're empowering and equipping people to do something about the topic that you're choosing, and then you're sort of creating a sort of virtuous circle, if you like, of drawing awareness to an issue, a problem, or something that's going on, but then also providing a solution to it as well, which I think is really important. So I think the big advice was, so I slightly dodged the question in the beginning by saying we've sort of done something before which gave us permission, but I think the reason why that had been a real success was because of that relevance, role, and solution that we had. So it wasn't just an opportunistic moment of, this seems like it's sort of the zeitgeist of the moment, let's get on it, which I think is where brands go wrong. So that would be my main point.
I think longevity also has a role to play in it as well, doesn't it? A commitment, you know, in terms of not just dipping your toe in the water for a cause, but actually standing by it and, you know, and seeing it through. Which
agree. Well, I think that's a really, really good point. I agree with that. Yeah.
Well, thank you so much for lifting the lid on this campaign. It's such a vast amount of work behind it, and it's just been really, really interesting to hear how it all came to life. But I'd love to ask you all to leave the audience with a bit of a takeaway, because we are in this, what I like to call a creative reboot moment in time. You know, we've all been quite pressured, working in different ways, and we're all sort of coming back in different ways and forms. So I'd love to get your view for the audience, because, you know, as Sarah mentioned, there's a lot of creatives in the industry, a lot of people in the industry who really do want to affect change on big societal issues. They want to see fresh work and fresh perspectives. And as this campaign shows, you know, no problem is too big to address through creativity. But that can feel like quite chunky to bite off in terms of knowing where to start. So I'd love to get a bit of a bite-sized view from you as to, you know, what you can do on an individual level to bring about something as impactful as this. And Will, could I put you on the spot and start with you? It's a very simple question.
Well, I don't know from an individual level, because I actually think that when you're trying to address large societal issues, I think collaboration is key. You know, I know it sounds like a bit of a cliche, but, you know, they're often complex, multifaceted problems. You know, there's a range of reasons for them why, and there's extra issues attached to them. So I think you need to lean into the expertise of everybody involved, really, you know, to recognize the expertise of your partners, of your, let's say, your research partner, your charity partner, your educational partner, whoever that, you know, you have to, respect their expertise and I think, because you can't do it all, you know, you don't always have the right answers. And I think to get to a response that really is going to create real world change, then you need everybody to work together to make that.
That's great advice. Collaboration is always a good approach. And Sarah, I'd love to put you on the spot and ask you the same question.
I think in order to truly gloriously pull this off, you've got to be prepared to operate at a visceral level. I think that's one of the things that made this so powerful as a campaign, the visceral almost investment from everyone, and be prepared to be investing for the long game.
Great advice, thank you. And last but not least, Peter, what would be your takeaway?
do you know what? Will made a very good point that I was going to make, so I'll think of something else. But in all honesty, I think I'm trying to articulate this properly. I think look at the things that you look at the things that you already have and the opportunities within that, because it doesn't, and the reason why I say that, sorry, is because the reason why Hope United came about is because BT is the lead partner of the Home Nations FAs. And that's really where the starting point was this. And we could have ended up with something completely different, which may have been a slightly wallpaper football related good luck Home Nations activity as a result. But that was really the sort of permission for the brief, because that's where we started. And so I think it doesn't necessarily have to be something that you might have something that if you overlay all the other bits that we've talked about, like relevance, like collaboration, then actually you can do something, and it might be easier than you think to do something, because you might already have something that gives you the permission to do it.
That's such a great point to end on, and such a kind of nice call to action for marketers as well, actually, because everyone within this industry has platforms or partnerships. That the scale of that actually is actually really exciting in terms of the opportunity for those platforms and partnerships to really drive change. You've given us so many insights, from the power of collaboration to the role of humility to what happens when you lean into the uncomfortable. So thank you so much for lifting the lid on this campaign. It's just been really brilliant to hear your insights. So thanks for joining us.
Well, thank you.
Thanks for having us.